Howdy ho, students. This is our marine mammals lecture, both 1 and 2. I'm going to just do it all at once rather than spreading it out over two different days. And I'll give you a discussion assignment at the end as well. So we're going to cover what mammals are and then the different groups of marine mammals. And then we'll look at some of the special adaptations that these marine mammals have because all of them, at least most of them, need to dive in order to get their food. All right, so some announcements. Again, this covers both marine mammals 1 and 2 for your in-class lectures. The next due date for projects is April 20th, so you've got a bit of time before you have your next round of things due. And there's a spring break that we're going to be having as well. So after this unit, actually, after marine mammals, we'll have our discussion due on Friday. I haven't picked out a paper or idea yet for that discussion, but it will be coming soon. And then you'll have spring break, and then you'll have an exam. The exams will be, for 175 students, will be the same. Open book, open note. And for the 375 students, it will also be open book, open note, but also timed. So you're not going to have an unlimited amount of time to do the test, but 175 students will. All right, so let's get started with marine mammals. First, we need to define what an mammal is, and hopefully this figure over here is familiar to you because we used it for talking about reptiles. And again, the big difference, or the structural difference that you can always point to for the difference between mammals and reptiles is this bone here. All right, so this is the dentary squamosal joint. Okay, so this purple is the dentary, this green is the, or bluish green is the squamosal, and that forms the joint, the hinge joint of the jaw. And a reptile has the articular quadrate, so two different bones, which in mammals, the quadrate and the articular migrated to the inner ear and became inner ear bones. So a mammal not only has the dentary squamosal joint, but it has 3 ossicles or inner ear bones. Whereas reptiles only have 1. All right, so structurally, there are lots of other differences as well, but this is one that evolutionarily and in fossils, paleontologists and people studying evolution will look at as the definitive feature of mammals and reptiles. All right, so there are other things, however, that are mammalian. They are endothermic homeotherms, just like our birds. Which means they have a narrow range of temperatures in which they can regulate their body temperature using metabolic activity. So they don't have to, they will behaviorally do things to change their surroundings, but internal is their main component for regulating body temperature. Mammals also have hair or fur, which is largely absent in marine mammals, but there are still bristles and very small amounts of hair. And evolutionarily, their ancestors have hair some of them have lost most of the hair or fur. Um, they also have mammary glands, which produce milk. They have live birth, so they're viviparous. Except for there are a couple of monotremes, a group called monotremes, like the duck-billed platypus and the echidna, which lay eggs, but they are largely viviparous. They also have a diaphragm. Okay, they use a diaphragm for breathing, which is unique to mammals. What else could you could add a few other things to this list, but this is a good list. All right, and I think there are a few other things on the video lecture which we aren't going to put on here, but I do want you to remember these ones. Okay, and we have a reference point for that because we talked about marine reptiles as well. All right, so we have those are mammals. Marine mammals then are interesting because our other groups were not exclusively marine, but the ability to be viviparous, to have live birth, allows you to not be dependent on a place to lay your eggs. So unlike marine reptiles and marine birds or seabirds, marine mammals have some groups which are exclusively marine. And so that would be the cetaceans and the sirenians. I'll just put Sirenia and Cetacea, which the Sirenians will also venture into fresh water sometimes, but they do stay in the water the whole time. And so those are exclusively marine. We have others which are mostly marine, including pinnipeds. And these include our seals and walruses and sea lions and fur seals, which are mostly marine, but they do haul out on land or ice, and they have their pups on land. And then our last group are the carnivorans. So there are a few carnivores which are very dependent on the marine environment. Now, there's a fifth group that we would add to this, and we would call them quasi-marine mammals. And there's two animals we could put on there, and maybe a couple more, but the two ones that we're going to put on there are the Arctic fox, and there's two bat species that eat fish from the sea. So we'll call these fishing bats. And I'll just mention them here. We aren't going to go over them. But these quasi-marine mammals, meaning they do have some of their resources pulling from the sea. The Arctic fox is a scavenger found in the Arctic. Okay, it's white in the winter and brown in the summer. And it will scavenge, eat marine seabirds, marine carcasses from marine mammals. It'll eat the leftovers from polar bears. It's very resourceful. It'll eat plenty of things which are on the land as well, but it has some of its resources coming from the marine environment. The fishing bats are very interesting. So there's one of them that's just called the greater bulldog-faced bat, and it hangs out around estuaries and sometimes will fly over more marine environments or greater salinity marine environments, and it can echolocate across the surface of the water, and based on the movements or the feedback it gets from its echolocation, it can detect little fish, and it will swoop and with its with its large feet and claws swoop in the water, kind of like a bald eagle, and scoop up a fish and eat it. So there are but they will not be entirely. They'll also eat insects and other things as well. So they aren't entirely dependent on the marine environment for their survival. Okay, so we're going to go into these different groups, and we'll talk about some of the other adaptations. So first, sorry, I had some extra ones. First, we will talk about pinnipeds. All right, pinnipeds include our seals, our sea lions and fur seals, and our walruses. Now, unfortunately, I put these on the wrong side. So I'm going to, switch these. Oops. You probably should too. So, because this is a sea lion, and this is a seal. Well, and how can I tell? Well, there's a couple of things which are different. So one is this sea lion, you can see it has an external ear. It's just a little flappy thing, but the seals have no external ear. And that, you can't see it, but also this has external testes. And the seals do not. All right, you can also see this neck here. The fur seals and the sea lions have long necks. And the seals do not. They have very short necks. All right, and you can also see here, its hind flippers, it can wiggle around in the other direction, so they're pointing towards their head, and it can walk. So hind flippers used for walking. It's more like waddling. But this seal cannot do that. So its hind flippers stay behind them. And instead it moves on land by undulation. So this is basically doing the worm. It just like kind of like a caterpillar, but it looks really awkward. They're not very good land movers. Not that sea lions are great on land, but the seals are even worse. And that's because they can't rotate their back limbs forward, and they're just fat. And they have short necks, right? So they are more adapted for the sea. Okay, the other thing is those hind flippers are their main propulsion in water. So it swims with their hind flippers. Whereas the sea lions, they swim with their fore flippers, front flippers. And so those are the main differences between the sea lions and the seals. So the seals are in the group Phocaedae, and the sea lions and fur seals are in Phocoenidae. I probably am saying that wrong, or Phocoenidae or Phocidae. And then the walruses are in their own group, Odobenidae, which odo refers to their teeth, right? Their large tusks. And so when you look at a walrus, okay, you can look at the characteristics and see, well, are they more like a seal or a sea lion? Well, you can notice their front flippers are cantered toward them, and they do walk or waddle like a sea lion. They do have bigger necks. It doesn't look like they have an external ear. And they swim with their front flippers. So they are more like our seals and sea lions, but they are unique. All right, so just what we did here, where we looked at the two pictures, there's another graphic which also shows the same things which we talked about. It doesn't talk about the neck, but all right. So you should be able to tell the difference between seals and sea lions just by looking at a picture, because there's a number of different characteristics you can look for. A good thing to do, and I might leave for you guys a string of YouTube videos, is watching a sea lion and a seal swim underwater. You can see how they use their flippers differently. All right, so that's our pinnipeds. All right, we have two species which are considered marine mammals. The sea otters, which are very interesting, and the polar bears. The sea otters have dense fur. In fact, it's the most dense fur of any other mammal. And it needs that dense fur to trap air for insulation while it swims. Now, the air doesn't stay trapped in there, so it spends a lot of time, a great percentage of its day, preening and getting the air trapped in there. So it has to spend a lot of time going over its fur and making sure it has that air trapped in there. Cool things about otters, they have very, very good use of their hands, so they're very dexterity. And so they can also use tools. They will use rocks and hard things to break open clams and the food that they eat. Sea otters are also mostly endangered. They have seen some rebound. So they were first endangered because of the fur trade, and they were found up and down the Pacific coast. So from Alaska down to Lower California. Their fur is very soft, and it was very sought after for after people, white settlers came and settled up and down the West Coast. And so they were almost hunted to extinction, but then they started to rebound. But now killer whales are eating them, which we talked about before. So there's a lot of threats to their existence. But yeah, they're also not very social. So they can be sometimes seen in pairs, and they will sometimes float while holding hands, which is really cute. But generally, they don't form large social groups like some of the other otters, like river otters. All right, polar bears are the largest bear, other than actually the Kodiak bears in Southeast Alaska are bigger, but generally they are the biggest species of bear. They have webbed feet. So they are, and huge paws for swimming. They generally don't need, they need to swim in the water, and they have very dense fur and lots of blubber to protect themselves. But they don't like hunt in the water. What they actually do is their main food source is seals, but they will scavenge for other food as well, whatever they can find, whale carcasses and whatnot. But they will essentially stalk seals at their holes, at their breathing holes, And there's some cool videos of them hunting seals on YouTube as well. But they will do their best to stalk the seals and then grab them before they dunk into the water. They're very dependent on sea ice. And so they are also very, there's many scientists which are concerned because they are going to be affected by the dramatic decrease in sea ice. So as sea ice is continually melting with the warming of the planet due to greenhouse gases and other factors, mostly human related, they are losing their habitat. So they are dependent on that ice for a healthy habitat, for a healthy lifestyle, for the things that they eat. Now, if sea ice is completely gone, they probably can still, some of them can survive along the coast. It's just going to be a lot less of them, and maybe none of them. So polar bears are of great concern for conservation, and they're kind of a poster child for global warming and the species being affected by it. All right, cetaceans, marine, completely marine mammals, which I was able to do my PhD research on a species of whale called the bowhead whale. And these, again, are completely marine. They don't ever come up on land. In fact, if they come up on land, they can be beached and die. They need to be wet, and they can't move on land. And there are two groups within cetaceans, the Mysticeti and the Odontoceti. All right, and the Odontoceti means toothed whales. So they have teeth. They're all peg-like teeth. They have homodont dentition, meaning all their teeth are the same, which is different than you and me. We have heterodont. We have different types of teeth, but they have just the same type of teeth. And the Mysticeti have instead of teeth, they have these plates made of keratin, similar to the hardness of your fingernail, but growing out of their gums, which they use to filter feed. Right? So Mysticeti are almost exclusively filter feeders, whereas odontocetes are exclusively predators. The mysticetes are larger, okay, including the largest largest animal on Earth, the blue whale. And the odontocetes are generally smaller, with the largest odontocetes being the orca and the sperm whale. The odontocetes have more species. There are about 75 species of odontocetes, and only about 13 or so, depending on how you split certain species of the mysticetes. In odontocetes, the males are generally larger than the females, and in mysticetes, females are generally larger than the males. And there are some theories to that I kind of explored in my research. And then lastly, the odontocetes are able to echolocate. The mysticetes do not echolocate, but they do have songs, which are for long-range communication. So the interesting thing about water and the marine environment is that sound travels further and faster in water than it does in air. And so communication over long periods, long distances is possible, and the cetaceans have taken advantage of that. And with the use of echolocation, the speed of the sound traveling is important for them to find their prey. Now, within Mysticeti, there are also two groups of baleen whales. The Balaenidae have very long baleen, are very slow moving, and are generally very fat and rotund. And so they also have generally very large heads and are able to take large amounts of water into their mouth and then filter out the water to capture their plankton that they eat. The Balaenopteridae have very short baleen, and relatively speaking are faster. And are more lean, right? They are more long and slender. And they have smaller heads. And they also have gular folds on their neck. Okay, so you will see if this is a whale from underneath with this fluke. You'll have these folds underneath, which are kind of like an accordion, and that allows them to expand their throats when they gulp water, whereas the Balaenids can't. There are a couple other groups in Mysticeti, but most of the species are in these two groups. All right, so that's cetaceans. I have a presentation on the history of whaling that I will do and record for you guys as well. As whale. The whales are generally not in great shape. There are some populations that have rebounded quite a bit since almost being completely extinct. But they could also use a lot of help because they are very affected by the negative things, the harmful things happening to the ocean. Okay, so more on whales in more recordings I'll give you in a minute. All right, Sirenians. These guys are really interesting, I think. There's not a lot of them, so we only have 4 living species and 1 extinct species. And the 4 living ones, there's 3 species of manatee. There's 1 species called the dugong, which is not related to the others. And then there's this extinct species called the stellar sea cow. And its problem was it is very big. It was very slow moving, and it was friendly to humans. And they would also form groups. And so they were very easy to kill and very delicious. And so they were just hunted by, they lived up in the Bering Sea. You can see this here, in between Alaska and Russia. And essentially when sailors came into this area and started exploring these areas and hunting and fishing, they would kill them and eat them, and they just didn't stop. By the time they noticed that they were endangered, it was too late. And so they went extinct. I can't remember exactly, but 1800s I think is when they went extinct. Which is sad, because I'm from Alaska, and it would be very cool to see them, but they are gone. All of them are herbivores, so they eat seagrasses. And we know that seagrasses only grow in the continental shelf, where you have water clarity and no pollution, right? And shallow water. And if you have any of those things, then the seagrasses won't grow, and then you won't see these manatees or sirenians that live there. Now, the difference between the dugong and the manatees, you can see it has a more ventrally faced mouth, meaning it's pointed down a little bit more. So it's a little bit more like a vacuum cleaner than the manatees, because it feeds kind of exclusively off of the bottom, where the manatee will feed in other areas of the sea column. The one that is in the United States is the West Indian manatee, and that's going to be found up and down the East Coast, but mostly in the Gulf and around Florida. They have been known to go in rivers, and there was one found in Memphis, Tennessee, a few years ago. But their geographic range extends all the way up and down North and South America on the east side. And they are very slow moving as well. They have been rebounding since being endangered. One of their biggest problems is that they are so slow moving they can't get out of the way of boats, and so boats will often run them over and kill them. And so after enacting these kind of no-wake zones, very slow areas, especially around manatees, there's been a lot less casualties, and they've been able to rebound a bit. Now, one of these, the Amazonian manatee, actually is a freshwater manatee. So you can see it goes up into Amazon and its tributaries. So it's not even marine, it's a freshwater manatee. But otherwise, it has a pretty similar lifestyle. The West African manatee then is in the west parts of Africa. You can see that here, and has a similar kind of combination between the two, because some of it goes in the rivers and some of it stays in the marine area. Another thing I wanted to point out, the dugong has a forked tail, and as did the stellar sea cow, whereas the manatees have this large flat tail, kind of looks like a spade. And so when they were first discovered, they were by white settlers. They were sometimes called mermaids, but they don't have very many human characteristics that I can see. Okay, so those are the sirenians. 4 species that are alive, 3 of which are marine, 1 extinct species. Now there are places in Florida where you can go and you can swim and feed the manatees. I would really like to do that someday, if we ever get out of social isolation. Okay, some diving adaptations. All right, well, these guys have to dive, mostly. And you and I could probably only hold our breath for a few minutes at best. Maybe some of us only 30 seconds at best. And when you dive, there are things that your body does in response to not being able to breathe and in the water. And we call this the dive response. And the same things that happen to your body actually happen to marine mammals as well. Just they have a more exaggerated effect because they need it to last a little bit longer. All right, so I'm going to go over some of these diving responses and answer why. So the first is the reduced heart rate. Okay, well, why would you want a reduced heart rate? Well, if you're going down and you're not going to breathe, that means you're going to be running out of oxygen. So if you can slow down your metabolism, you can use less oxygen. And that one of the ways to do that is reduce your heart rate. Okay, you will also have restricted blood flow. and it will concentrate to your vital organs, meaning your brain, not your lungs. You don't need to use those, but your brain and your heart. Okay? Well, why is that? That's because, well, we're going to concentrate to the organs that are going to keep you alive, that are vitally important. So oxygen is concentrated to vital organs. So that means your kidneys are not going to be functioning very well while you're diving. Your digestive system, your urinary system, all of that is not really important when you need to conserve your oxygen. So those are the things that you have, but some of the other things that they have that we don't have, elastic lungs. Okay? And this allows many marine mammals to collapse their lungs. Okay, and that's due to the pressure. So at high pressure, when you go down, you're going to have pressure on your lungs. And if you can collapse them and then reinflate them, because they're elastic, then you're not gonna have to worry about them collapsing and then not being able to do that. Also, it allows them to prevent air from getting into their lungs and having a problem called the bends, where when you go in a high pressure situation deep in the ocean, the gas that is in your blood will also compress, and more gas will go into your blood. Well, then when you go back up and you go in a lesser pressure state, then that gas will come out of your blood, and that can cause a lot of problems, which is called the bends. So if you can restrict your lungs so they aren't inserting more air into your blood, then you won't have that problem. And along with that, breathing out will remove carbon dioxide, which is generally the signal that you use to tell yourself that you need to take another breath. So if you relieve all the carbon dioxide, you're going to be able to hold your breath longer. And with that, there's another thing called apnoistic breathing, which is taking a bunch of exhales and then holding your breath, and that allows you to hold your breath longer because you remove the carbon dioxide from your blood. Another thing that some marine mammals will do is called a decompression dive. So what they will do is if this is them, they will dive a few times, and their body will get used to, if this is how far they're going under the water, they'll get used to diving and be able to remove a lot of the oxygen and air out of their blood by breathing out, and then they'll do a big dive. So these decompression dives then help them to prepare for a longer dive. Or deeper dives, I should say. We mentioned that the lungs collapse. They also have a high tolerance for anaerobic respiration. So that allows them to switch when they run out of oxygen. They still have a lot of anaerobic methods that they can turn to, and so they have a high tolerance for lactic acid. They also are able to store oxygen in both hemoglobin, which is found in the blood, and myoglobin, which is found in the muscles. So where you and I have, let's say you and I have 100 molecules of hemoglobin in our blood. They might have 200 or 300, so that they can have more oxygen in each red blood cell. And then they can also have more red blood cells in their blood. Yep, I'm going to call that the RBC count. All of these can store oxygen. Myoglobin is found in the muscles. It's similar to hemoglobin, and when your muscles need oxygen, the myoglobin takes it from the hemoglobin. All right, so all in all of those things combined allow marine mammals to hold their breath for a very long time, dive as long as they need to, and not be affected by the pressure which occurs when they dive deep into the ocean. There are other things as well, but this again is a good list. All right, so I wanted to also touch on echolocation. I have here this is a dolphin, right? All right, and this is its blowhole, and how it breathes, and it's able to make clicks, and it does this through a couple of elastic and movable structures found in their blowhole called phonic lips, sometimes called monkey lips. And so it makes these sounds and clicks and everything it needs to echolocate using that. And then it has this structure in its forehead, which is why they kind of have a funny shaped head called a melon. So the sound goes out of the phonic lips and then is directed and amplified by the melon. And it can change the shape of this melon. Melon is filled with fluid, so it can change the shape, and it can attenuate or point the sounds in a direction that it wants. That sound will then hit off of objects, such as this fish, and then will bounce back, and it will actually pick up the vibrations in its lower jaw. Now, what's weird is you can hear through your bones as well. That's why you sound funnier to yourself than you do when you hear recordings of yourself, because the sound that you are making is bouncing off all the structures in your head, and so what you hear is not the same as what other people hear. But yeah, and you can do funny experiments where you put your finger on your ear and if you had a tuning fork, you can hold a tuning fork up to your elbow as you touch your ear, and you'll be able to hear it. Or you can put it on your jaw. You can do a bunch. You can hear through your bones, and so what they do is they're hearing through their lower jaw, picking up these echolocation signals, which then go to their inner ear, which transmits it to their brain. And there they then form an image, or are able to pick up location and specific data about what that sound is coming off of. But yeah, that's essentially how echolocation works. It works a little bit different in land animals. So bats also echolocate, but it's relatively the same in that you emit a sound, it bounces off something, and then it's picked up in the ear eventually and transmitted to the brain. What's interesting is that humans can also echolocate. There are some humans who were born blind who develop these clicks that they can use to then tell the difference between objects in an area. And if we were in class, I would show you some YouTube videos of some people doing this. All right, last thing we want to talk about is reproduction. Some of the things that marine mammals do. They have internal fertilization. Why? Well, because all mammals have internal fertilization. They have live birth, and they are mammals. So this is a vestige of being a mammal. They aren't fish, so they don't lay eggs. They're restricted to being similar to all the other mammals. They have delayed fertilization or delayed implantation. Okay, what delayed implantation is that the sperm and the egg form a zygote, and it will go through certain rounds of mitosis and form an embryo, but it will not the embryo will not implant into the uterus until later. And the reason why that is because they want to be born in an ideal condition. So when the mating season does not line up with the ideal conditions for birth, you've got to have some sort of timing method to prevent them being born in like the middle of the winter when they would just die and freeze to death. So they mate in the fall. They have delayed implantation. Implantation then happens later in the winter so that they are born in the spring or summer. And so it is more ideal for their calves. They have a long gestation. Okay. And they have few young. That is to ensure a fully developed young that can swim. Otherwise, if it couldn't swim, if it wasn't big enough, then it would just die, right? So it has to be in a condition where it can swim at least. So they are born relatively large and able to fully function in the marine environment. Some of them will also migrate, and this is because food resources change variably geographically, so they will go to where the food is. And they will sometimes use vocalizations. We don't know exactly what's involved, but their songs appear to travel long distances, and maybe that's how they can locate each other for mating periods. And that's pretty much it. Okay, so that's it for marine mammals. Again, I will post a video of the history of whaling for you guys to look at as well. Whale, I can't help saying that. It's just funny, right? But this is all for marine mammals, and I'll post a discussion for you guys to talk about or read about and discuss on the online discussion forum on Canvas. All right, see you guys later.